Hello, everybody. Happy Wednesday. It's another episode of Seminole Sidelines. Ariya Massoudi, Curt Weiler, Bob Ferrante joining you here as we continue with this Florida State Athletics Sports Week. It is June 14th. Appreciate those of you watching on YouTube, on Facebook, and on Twitter live. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you can also interact with this show by commenting on YouTube and on Facebook. We appreciate you guys for sticking with us here as we've started the Osceola since August. It's been a lot of fun, and we're getting close to about a year now as an official member of the Rivals.com family. And today we'll spend some time talking about the DNs for Florida State as we start our position group previews over the summer. The staff will be putting out those on FloridaState.Rivals.com, the Osceola.com. You can subscribe there as well. And we get closer and closer to kickoff here for the 2023 season. Curt, obviously a Florida State team last year, defensively took some steps forward. Jared Verse was a big reason for that. He's going to headline a group that looks to be dynamic again, getting into opposing backfields.
Yeah, I remember down the stretch of last season, there's a lot of talk of like, man, that defensive line, or really that defensive Hall of Fame, managed to get Jared Verse back for a second season. And there was always, I feel like, the caveat of like, but I doubt that's going to happen. He's a guy who's a first or at worst probably second round pick. And I mean, it just didn't seem likely at all. So, I mean, of all the announcements of returning, I mean, him and Jordan Travis, I think, definitely resonated the loudest, although there were a lot of impactful ones. It's a big deal. I think, I mean, that LSU game kind of right off the bat early in his career, we saw the type of impact he can make, the type of player he can be. I mean, against Gray, you see why he was one of the more coveted players in the transfer portal, why basically everybody wanted him. And yeah, I think that being said, I mean, you saw the pass rush impact, and you saw, I think he was limited down the stretch somewhat with an injury, maybe never reached that form again. But I also think he was right to identify there are some areas of my game I could round out. I think I could be a little better against the run. I think I can be a more complete kind of every down player. And if I do that, I mean, you look at him, he has all the makings of a top 10 pick if he kind of puts it all together. I think he looks the part. I think he plays the part. I think it was betting on himself to be sure by coming back, but it's, I think, a bet that could absolutely play out because, I mean, he has a chance to be a really impactful player this year.
I think it's a good bet in the long term for Jared because, like you said, could he be a top 10 pick 2024? I think you're maybe not selling yourself short. I think you love Florida State. If you're Jared Verse, you love the work. A guy like Jared, I think we always see him smiling. We always see him. He's got a love and a passion for everything that he does in the game. And, you know, to some extent, let's applaud Battle's End and the NIL opportunities that are out there for these guys who desire to come back to campus and maybe further themselves in the classroom, on the football field as leaders. It really is a good opportunity for Jared, for the program, obviously, to build around him. And if you're looking at the top reasons why, you know, we're also high on Florida State, yeah, it's a Jordan Travis, it's a Johnny Wilson, a Trey Benson, Jared Verse, and the list goes on and on. I mean, all this returning talent is why you think Florida State can unseat Clemson and have a real shot at an ACC championship.
Curt, you mentioned he was one of the big announcements to come back, and it was potentially a first-round pick, definitely at worst a second-round pick, probably in this past draft. Do you feel like this will be a season in which we see Jared Verse stamp himself as arguably the best defensive end in the ACC and one of the best in the country?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised at all. There are other candidates, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if next month he's the ACC preseason defensive player of the year. I mean, without digging into all of it yet, I would say I'm probably leaning towards voting for him because, I mean, of the impact he had, even I think being at less than 100%, playing through an injury for portions of last season. I think a year in the system, a year at this level of college football helped him. I think he learned some valuable lessons and was really impactful during that. But I think he can come out the other side. I mean, maybe even take that production to another level this fall. I think he's absolutely in contention to be an All-American type.
They're going to need him, Bob, right? Game 1 against LSU, similar to the way that he played last year. You feel like if FSU is going to slow down that Tigers offense, front four is going to be very important, and Verse is going to have to win a lot of battles there one-on-one.
Yeah, I feel like this is going to take on a different shape from that 22 game in New Orleans, where, it was LSU's first game, first year coaching staff. They had a lot of uncertainties. I'm sure there's a lot of plays where Jaden Daniels would say, I'd love to have that back. I'd love to have the experience of stacking games and knowledge of your receivers, your offensive line, just that cohesion. On the Florida State side, you've got a lot of veterans. You've got the Jared Verse on one side. You've got a Patrick Payton on the other. But I think, again, with defensive end, and we'll get into it later too, to me, it's not who starts. It's about that deep rotation. We've always heard from coaches, you must be very, very good on the defensive front, and then tackle, and just have enough bodies to be fresh, to get after the quarterback, because it is very much with the spread offense or any type of offense. It feels like you're running sideline to sideline constantly, whether it's a mobile quarterback, whether it's a running back. We've seen a lot of wheel plays. Wheel plays are what can trip up defenses too. So, but in the end, you've got to have that kind of depth on the front. And when you have a Jared Verse, when you have a Patrick Payton, you feel really, really good about where you are as a defensive front.
Yeah, I think when you look at I think a lot of people looking at that FSU LSU game are pointing out, hey, LSU last year had a pair of freshman offensive tackles who were playing their first game in college football. And then I think by the end of the year, they were notably better than they were in that first game. But you also can't ignore, like you said, how much Jared Verse, I think, has grown and how much other players on that defensive line, it goes beyond Jared Verse, have grown. I think talking about one while maybe not paying attention to the other equally, doesn't do a fair testament to the strides Florida State made last season.
Yeah, 100%. Also a thing that I was thinking about earlier this morning was the fact that, Verse is now in his second season in Tallahassee. Obviously last year, very talented, but now I think he can take a step forward as a leader as well, right? And kind of be a vocal personality within those huddles. He's got a great personality on him already.
He ain't afraid to be vocal.
No, he's not. And I'm saying to be in your second year, though, to have a little more ownership over locker room, those are going to be the differences, right? Like when we were last year talking about these games against Wake and NC State, against Clemson, where you felt like maybe the guys were a year away from truly winning one of these games. Maybe it is that year experience for Verse that allows him to kind of keep the guys together when things aren't going well, and to make just those one or two plays that change the course of a game and put you on the right side of the win column. And so looking forward to Jared Verse. Do you guys feel like that D end group as a whole, we're going to talk about Pat Payton here in a second. Do you guys feel like that D end group is going to take a step forward as an entire unit?
If you're asking about as an entire unit, to me, sorry, Bob. I think it depends on kind of some of the questions in that group hitting. What do you get from Byron Turner? What do you get from Jaden Jones? I think you like the top three, and beyond that, there are questions that I think could be proven. Oh, we shouldn't have really questioned them. These guys are kind of they're taking the step they needed to take, and I think there's also a world where there are questions that don't really get answered beyond those top three, if we're being honest.
Yeah, I think the question, to John Papuchis was asked after the spring practices of how many guys do you want that you can depend on? Like, what's your optimum number? And he outlined 5. You want truly a 2-man rotation for End and Fox, but you want a 5th guy who's a hybrid who can kind of float back and forth, and you have to plan for the event of an injury, right? So there's just a lot of different moving pieces there. I think you've got so many different options. Again, where's a Dennis Briggs potentially fit in? Is he more of a tackle? Can he fit in as an end here and there in certain situations? But the depth, I think, is a really nice piece here. When you look back at, say, 2021, that was a really nice group of defensive ends with Jermaine Johnson and Keir Thomas, and in part, a Jared Verse is here because of them. I didn't feel like there was a ton of depth behind a Jermaine and a Keir back then in 2021. Now you feel like this is a room that is much, much deeper and ready to be in attack mode. And you're not. I'd have to go back and look at the plays, for example, like what was the play log for a Jermaine Johnson and a Keir Thomas. But I think now you might look at it and say, okay, we don't have to have a Jared Verse out there a ton of plays and just absolutely wear him out. you've got guys behind him that you can throw out there too.
You get the sense though, right, that this unit can't get injured though. Like I feel like you can't lose. You lose a verse, and obviously it's going to be tough to kind of regroup from that. It seems like I mean, I know there are some options there, but it does seem relatively thin in terms of experienced talent that you can just run out there. But that seems to be like a lot of Florida State's too deep, other than maybe like tackle. Like, you know, in the tackle, you're like, I feel pretty good about if someone drops down, that we're going to be okay. Everywhere else, you're kind of like, I don't know that we can afford injuries at this group.
I mean, that kind of speaks to how far Florida State's expectations have come, where I think we think this can be an ACC winning team, a college football playoff winning, contending team, if things break right in terms of injury luck. I mean, truthfully, outside of a small handful of teams that it took years to build that depth, your Georgias, your Alabamas, I think that's true at a lot of places. But yeah, I think it is reliant, and defensive end is one of them, on some best case scenarios when injury luck. So, I mean, truthfully, depth-wise, this is where they missed Derek McClendon. Like, you know, like that is Derek McClendon a world-beating defensive end, a guy who's going to get all ACC? Probably not. Is he reliable and can play a lot of games and reps and snaps and has played a lot of games and reps and snaps at Florida State? Absolutely. He wanted – I imagine somewhat he could see the writing on the wall of I'm probably not going to be the starter. I think it seemed clear that, I mean, just in terms of upside, I think Jared and Pat Payton were going to be the starters. And now Derek McClendon's at Colorado. And it's tough. I mean, I understand both sides of it, but it is frustrating, I'm sure, from a Florida State standpoint of like, we thought we could sell, we're selling you on what your role is and how important you are. And he saw differently.
This is the revolving door of the transfer portal, right? I mean, this is, hey, it's great that you can go out and get a Jared Verse and a Gilbert Edmond, but yeah, every now and then you're going to lose a Derek McClendon type of guy who really is a piece of what you're doing. And look, Derek McClendon might have a breakout year at Colorado and light up the Pac-12. My opinion again still is he would have been better off at Florida State, where he's part of that rotation, and he's going to get after these tired offensive tackles because they've been fighting a Jared Verse and a Patrick Payton type for 40 some plays. I mean, you want your opportunities to be here, you know, and again, where the NFL scouts are watching you here. But I think it does underscore the importance of a Gilbert Edmond, a guy that we really, really liked out of the spring. So I think the fact that you were able to hit the portal and bring him in, I think that, I won't say makes up for a Derek McClendon loss, but it makes you feel better about McClendon looking elsewhere.
You can't not take a Gilbert Edmond over hopes of keeping Derek McClendon happy. And what if Derek leaves anyways, and then you didn't take Gilbert Edmond? I think you have to kind of, I mean, it's, I think, a smart guy to bring in. You look at the stats, I mean, especially in terms of pass rush, not the most impactful, but I mean, you look at him run, you look at how he is an athletic freak. I think he's a guy, he talked about some schools wanted to recruit him as a linebacker. That's how athletic he is, like an outside linebacker type who could kind of be in coverage more and also serve as some of the pass rusher blitzer type. But he wanted to play defensive end, and Florida State wanted him there. And I think he was a guy who I'm interested to see what he looks like. I think he's a really strong third option. I mean, I think he could come in potentially at either of the Fox or end spots in relief of Verse or Payton. And I think can be really impactful. I mean, we've seen the track record of what Florida State's done with defensive ends coming in. I think it's a credit to John Papuchis. It's a credit to Adam Fuller. I think it's entirely possible Gilbert Edmond, maybe not in a starting role, but is the next one.
I think you're going to see Adam Fuller use him predominantly, like you guys said, defensive end, but it wouldn't surprise me to see him on stunts and twists and lining up maybe over the nose tackle at times, standing. They're going to find some different unique things to be able to do with him. And he's a low floor guy, right? Like it's a guy that played at South Carolina in the SEC, and you feel confident about the competition he faced for a couple of seasons. You feel like it translates, and you just kind of know what you're getting. And that's important. And that's a big deal for Florida State. And you know what? He could start, but the reason that I think most people feel like he's a good depth option is because of the way Pat Payton came on last year, ACC Defensive Rookie of the Year. And Pat's got a chance to really make a major jump, I think, this season and have himself a nice year.
Yeah, Pat Payton's development has been really cool. I mean, he came in as a relatively thin guy, right? I mean, he needed time from a strength and conditioning standpoint to, build that body that was going to be effective, play in and play out. I think, we saw Pat Payton down the stretch, like you said in the stats there, 5 sacks, ACC Defensive Rookie of the Year, a very, very good compliment to Jared Verse and to the total package of your rotation. So Pat Payton, I think he might be looking at this season too as this is my money year. This is my chance to also show that I'm a high draft pick. And year three, we like year three guys. I think part of that defensive end discussion is you see a Pat Payton, you see a Byron Turner, you see guys who feel very, very comfortable in their understanding of the defense, in the playbook, in what's the assignment for yourself, the guy next to you, so you can get the most out of yourself. Pat's a guy who I think we've really, really enjoyed watching and we think very highly of.
It was a scary proposition in the spring. I mean, think about the season he just had, the impact, how he really stepped up when Jared Verse went down. I think that's when we saw him emerge. And then Mike Norvell and a few others talked about him maybe being the most improved player this spring. I mean, if he's able to take it to another level, which you would expect him to, I'm sure he learned some valuable lessons from how much he kind of got thrown into the fire as a redshirt freshman last year. And yeah, it's a scary proposition. I mean, if he adds more weight, if he continues to shape that body, I mean, he has grown into being, I mean, from being the skinny guy he was when he arrived to, I mean, looking the part of a really impactful defensive end. And it's what he did last year, you add weight to that. I mean, you'd imagine it can kind of round out his game and elevate his game even higher and be quite a 1-2 punch with Jared Verse.
He had some sacks in some big games too. Oklahoma came to mind. Had one at Miami. Mm-hmm. I want to say he had one against Wake Forest as well. Like, he's played well in important games for Florida State. And as a young player, that's very impressive. And truthfully, like, if Florida State's going to make a run, right, at winning the ACC and then pushing for a college football playoff or a New Year's Six Bowl, you're going to need someone other than Jared Verse, I think, to kind of step up and really cause headaches for opposing offensive lines. So Payton, as good of a candidate as any. Is it going to be Gilbert Edmonds? Potentially. Having that depth is important. Having a couple of guys, though, step up and be really good, I think is important as well. Some other options for Florida State that could step up this season. I've got Fiske and Briggs at the end, but just because they're versatile and can play outside. However, between Green, Turner, and the junior college transfer Jayden Jones, do you guys think one of those three will step in and be an important part of Florida State's team this year?
I think one of them has to be. I think you're circling one of those three as the fourth guy, most likely in the 2 deep.
Yeah, I think my money might be on Byron Turner just because of the experience at Florida State, what he showed us in the spring. I mean, if there was a beneficiary of Derek McClendon opting to transfer kind of mid-spring, which was really awkward, obviously, but a Byron Turner stepped into that role. With Jayden Jones, again, he had that early season junior college ACL, so he had to have surgery, missed the JUCO season. But he said consistently, he feels like he's going to be, as close to 100% to give it a go when August camp starts. So you've got time. You've got time to feel it out, to learn, to be on that practice field and see what you can do. I kind of look at Jayden as a guy who maybe could be that hybrid fifth defensive end that John Papuchis is talking about looking for. Again, it's unfortunate you didn't get a chance to see him in the spring. You would have liked to have that, but I think he was a guy who was out at practices, in the film rooms, kind of listening and learning along the way. So there are some benefits of having him here, from strength and conditioning, rehabilitation that might have sped up his process. So I think there are some, let's say, wild cards for sure in this group. You don't really know what you're going to get, but their ceiling is pretty cool.
Yeah, and these are a couple of guys too that I think will have to, like Curt said, step up, and one of them has to be an option for Florida State in that 2 deep. And again, you're going to have seasons in a season where there'll be dink and dunks, and nicks and knacks, and some guys will be missing at least a few plays here and there. And I like Jaden Jones's game a lot, just from looking at his tape. He's another one that I think could step in. Obviously, with Fisk and Briggs, two guys that can play outside if you need them. I'm interested to see how Florida State uses, Briggs and Fisk, who we haven't really seen yet, by the way. Missed most of spring, if not all, trying to heal up. But the versatility of that D-line, I think the Noles have options to be able to be effective no matter the outcome for Adam Fuller.
They definitely have options, and it should make for a fascinating preseason of just of kind of narrowing down that too deep and that group that you imagine they're going to really rely on. I mean, like you talked about, does Byron Turner carry over? We thought a pretty good spring and stay healthy. And the big thing with him, the thing with Byron Turner has never been what he looks like when he's out there. It's how often he's out there. He missed time each of his first 2 years with injuries. He missed all of his freshman season in 2021 with an injury. And so, I mean, I think, does he carry that over? Jaden Jones, I agree. I like a lot. The one caveat, really, he looks the part. I mean, as a JUCO guy arriving at Florida State, the one caveat is about a year removed from the ACL, how ready to go is he? I mean, that's something that even when you can theoretically return, sometimes a year after an ACL, it feels like it takes a little longer than that for guys to start looking like themselves and producing like themselves again. Is it in a spot where, I mean, Lamont Green, I'm not quite sure is ready to be in the too deep, kind of what we saw freshman year, what we've seen in his first, 12 or 16 months on campus. I think still could have a future here, but I'm not sure I'm really throwing him in that category. And so, yeah, is there a world where you have to maybe play Fisk or Dennis Briggs outside more than you wanted just out of pure necessity? In theory, absolutely. And so it makes the preseason camp big for finding that out.
You could go with some odd fronts. I mean, do you try some 5-man fronts, for example, just because? I mean, you've got numbers. What do you do on third down when you're looking for a guy who can just beat a one-on-one? I mean, is a Braden Fisk an option there? He was so limited in the spring. I mean, he was out there. He was, he was able to run. He was able to move. It was a shoulder injury, so that's the good thing is he had time on the field. But how he can be utilized within this defense, I think that versatility is a real advantage. But it's really also a question mark for us until we see him in August, just how he best fits in. But I think when you look at the aspect of an injury and you maybe have that fear, you always have in the back of your mind, okay, you've got a Dennis Briggs, you've got a Braden Fisk, a guy who can play either position.
Yeah. I think it'll be fascinating. And obviously, you guys check our website for the written preview for the defensive ends position group. And we'll continue our position group previews throughout the next couple of weeks, not just on the site, but here on Seminole Sidelines. Guys, before we wrap up and say goodbye, this week you had a chance to talk to some new guys. Blake Nicholson, Conrad Hussey, Ed Joseph, and Jabril Rawls. What were some of your takeaways from getting an opportunity to interview these guys for the first time? And what are you hoping to see out of them as they get their feet wet in Tallahassee and their first fall camp?
I can talk Blake Nicholson, Bob. I wrote about him. He's on the website. I wrote about him yesterday after the interview. I mean, he's a fascinating guy, obviously coming all the way from California, kind of far and away the furthest traveler to Tallahassee to kind of enroll as a part of this 2023 class. He was a guy who I think we liked a lot, obviously in need of linebackers. I'm curious the role he can step into right away. He talked pretty candidly about he was a great two-way player in high school. He ran for, I think, almost 4,000 yards his last 2 years of high school in addition to playing linebacker. And I think he's excited. He said, look, I'll miss running back a bit for sure, but I'm excited to see what I can do, kind of focusing all my attention, spending all my time on being a linebacker. And he's a guy, what's his role year one? Does he he might be the fifth guy. It's possible. Like if an injury were to happen, he probably plays special teams. And I think he's a guy who, when you're losing, potentially multiple linebackers off this 2023 team, could be a starter as soon as 2024. He definitely looks the part, and he talked about, I mean, he's a guy who in today's football where athleticism is kind of key on defense, and they try and space you out, guys who can move well, guys who are sideline to sideline linebackers. That's how he described himself. I mean, it seems like he described himself to Fred Warner with the 49ers, but in that regard, it reminds me of Kalen DeLoach. That's how Kalen DeLoach plays. He's all over the place. You can use him in so many different ways, and I think that may be kind of a similar path that he takes at Florida State.
Yeah, Blake kind of strikes me as a smart running back with instincts who loves to hit. And I think, we talk about runners and hitters, and that's kind of the linebacker that you might really want big picture. I think Blake is going to be a guy that Florida State fans will see a lot of in 2024, but how much do you get him on the field, say special teams and as a reserve? Obviously, there's a lot of games that we think Florida State might pull away. I mean, do you see him in some of those lesser, non-Power 5 type games for Florida State? I think with a guy like, say, Conrad Hussey, Edwin Joseph, Jabril Rawls, you never know how many of those guys will get the 4 games because of the redshirt rule. Again, we love the redshirt rule because it gets you some time on the field. The other question, though, is safety is kind of a question mark from a depth standpoint. If Conrad or Edwin are able to learn and get some playing time, practice time right away and just kind of fit in there, you might see those guys getting a few more than 4 games. That's good opportunities for them, even though they didn't enroll early. These are guys who you think could get to contribute early and then really make an impact in 2024.
Blake Nicholson's, I think, got a chance to play early. That position group is thin, right, at linebacker. There's not a ton of options. So I think of the 4, right? Like of the 4, he's probably got the best chance to see the field early.
A safety is thinner, in my opinion, though, man.
Yeah?
Yeah. Who do you like at safety behind Shyheim and Akeem? You feel good about your top 2, but beyond that, it feels like a crapshoot of who's 3rd, who's 4th.
No doubt. I think I actually expect, though, Florida State to add somebody there before fall camp starts. We'll see how that plays out, but it seems like they're still very active trying to figure somebody out if they can to join the ranks. Someone older, I guess, so to speak, from the transfer portal. But
I say we're talking to Ashlyn Barker, the JUCO safety they brought in tomorrow.
Yeah. And then obviously, with Joseph and Rawls, guys that, are going to have to probably wait their turn and maybe they get some special teams opportunities if they shine in the fall and then they impress JP. But been cool to talk to some of these guys. I know we had a chance to talk to Destin Hill recently, as well as Keon Coleman, 2 other guys that I know Florida State fans were highly anticipating. Man, I got to tell you guys, Keon Coleman looks the part, right? Like when you see him, and he walks in a building, you're like, all right, physically very mature already and someone who's going to step in. I was super excited about what he brings to the table. And then I laughed because, Destin Hill's a real person, I can't believe that I had convinced myself that it was a legend and a myth that this was actually just going to be one of those that almost got to Florida State's that we talk about being impact guys. So very excited about those 2 as well.
Yeah, I like Keon. I think if you're looking for one guy to break out among the transfers, I think Keon's going to just have a fantastic season. I mean, 6'4", with the way he runs, how he adjusts to the ball. That's a guy that I think, Curt wrote that he was, I think, a luxury, I think was the word that Curt wrote at that point, where you didn't necessarily need a guy like Keon. But after losing Micah Pittman, after losing a Malik McLean, a Keon really is that kind of mismatch guy. A basketball player who knows how to fight for the one-on-ones midair. That's the type of guy that I think makes a difference for you on a lot of plays. He thinks he's going to get 50-plus catches. He thinks he might have more yards than up at Michigan State in 2022. I think that's to be determined, but his impact will be significant regardless of where those numbers end up to me.
I think important for him too, especially once Peyton Thorne left, was he knows the quarterback throwing to him has had a good track record of success, and he'll get to play. I mean, you talked about the playing in the big prominent games like with Derek McClendon. He's going to get to do that at Florida State. He knows, I think he talked about how much talent they're bringing back is a big reason for why he chose Florida State and what he thinks this team can accomplish. So whatever his target numbers are, whether I don't think his yardage going down would even be a bad thing necessarily. Like, as long as it doesn't like fall off the face of a cliff, just because he will still get, I think, plenty of looks and have Jordan Travis throw into him and be able to work opposite Johnny Wilson, who is going to draw a lot of attention.
Good show, guys. I think it's a good place to put a pin in it. Next show's on Friday, 12:30, right back here, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, if you want to watch live. And these are always available as a podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever else you get your favorite podcast. Please like and subscribe. Subscribe to the Osceola.com. We appreciate you guys. And we will talk to you soon on Friday. For Bob Ferrante and Curt Weiler, I'm Ariya Massoudi, and this has been Seminole Sidelines.